Hello there, and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be talking about LINEART, and it's going to be talking about LINEART featuring our friendly neighborhood Spiderman, because I watched Into the Spider-Verse like 2 weeks ago and haven't been able to stop thinking about it since then. It's like such a good film. I can't even express how good of a film it is. It's like so good. If you haven't seen it yet, please, if you like anything in the realm of art and animation and comics and anything in the realm of that, watch this movie, because the animation was just like to die for. Like seriously, I could go on for hours, but that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is LINEART, and I decided to include the sketching and the coloring process for this artwork because it just didn't really feel complete otherwise. But while I'm still going through the sketching process, I want to say that these LINEART methods can work with any type of sketch, even if it's just a sketch that you've done with your pencil and you took a picture. But it is going to be sort of Photoshop specific. Like a bunch of these methods can work with any sort of digital coloring software, but the one I'm using is Photoshop, and I'm also using a drawing tablet to sketch. But the sketching process again isn't the focus, so this would work, like this advice would hold firm even if it was something that you did traditionally and took a picture of it and put it into Photoshop. Or the methods that I'm talking about with the tablet could also work with ink pens if you had like a light table. Like this is all kind of flexible, but I did want to talk about it in sort of a more, I guess, informative manner of different types of LINEART, what they could be used for and stuff like that. So we're still just wrapping up the sketch, but pretty soon we're going to be starting the LINEART process, and I'm going to be taking you through 3 different ways that I LINEART things, and it's going to go from like simpler to more complicated, though arguably the middle one could be more complicated depending on how you interpret it. But yeah, I just thought it would be kind of interesting to know, because there's a lot of different ways to do this and a lot of ways to achieve it, and LINEART was something that really confused me when I was first starting out digital art. So this first kind of approach to LINEART is just I turned the opacity of the sketch layer down so it's a bit more transparent, and this would be the equivalent of putting a new sheet of paper and having your world sketch on a light box if you're working traditionally, or in Photoshop's having it on separate layers and having the sketch layer be more transparent. And I'm just using basically the same brush that I was using to sketch, which is one of the Photoshop defaults, which is the hard round brush. This is a little clip that I sandwiched in of me drawing real time, which is a little real short, and then now we're back to being sped up. So yeah, this method of LINEART I would use for an illustration that I would approach in a more painterly manner, that's not terribly sharp, that has like more texture to it, more painting. I'll put a link in the card to other videos that I've done that have used this method, which has a LINEART that isn't terribly sharp, and it's actually quite quick, because if you can tell that I'm kind of erasing as I go, and I undo strokes every now and then, but most of the time I just go with the first or the second stroke that I go with, and not being too meticulous. This is actually like the least sped up part of the video, but I kind of wanted it to like show for a little bit longer just for the sake of wanting to talk about it. But it's kind of, I would approach it was like a quote unquote cleaner sketch or over sketch, something like that. It was not 100% LINEART, but there's a lot of artists that I know that this is their version of LINEART, or if they don't do LINEART they would consider this LINEART or something like that. And yeah, it's just, I don't know, I feel like it's quick, it's comfortable. It took around like 16 minutes to line. After I finished the sketching process, it took like 16 minutes, and I think it looks quite good, honestly. But yeah, it's not the sharpest, it's not the most detailed. It's good for overpainting, but I wouldn't really consider it super advanced LINEART. And yeah, that's the first one I wanted to take you through. The second type of LINEART that I'm taking you through is something that I did a lot more when I was first starting out with digital drawing. Even though I already had my tablet, I didn't really have the dexterity to get really smooth lines. So I used to do LINEART with this tool called the pen tool, and I'll try to find a tutorial that explains the pen tool in more detail already to put in the description. But the pen tool is this tool in Photoshop and like Illustrator and InDesign and a bunch of other programs also have it that works with curves. So you basically click and drag, and instead of doing like a straight line, like you click on one point, you click into another point, and then it does a line, and then without letting go of the second point, you like drag it and it creates a curve. And it's sort of like you have to test it to see how it works, and the more you play with it, the more you improve at it. And I wanted to state right now in the middle of this line art process that I actually did this entire line art without my drawing tablet, and I just really wanted to showcase this this line art style, because I know, especially when I was starting out, if I'd known about the pen tool when I first got Photoshop, because I got Photoshop before I got a drawing tablet, it would have saved my life, because I really didn't like the way that I was able to draw things digitally without a tablet, which brought me to have a tablet. And I think if you're really interested in drawing, you really getting a drawing tablet's a good investment. But it's still possible to do it without, if you just use the pen tool and you get to learning how to use the pen tool. So that's why I really wanted to include it, because I think it would have been super valuable to me if I'd learned about the pen tool a bit earlier on. And it's a really good alternative to having a drawing tablet. Of course, it's not as fast. Like it didn't take the longest out of all of it. This did take the second longest. The third version of LINEART did longer, but it does take a lot longer than the clean sketch version that we just went through. But I think it looks pretty good. A lot of animators, and in animation, for example, in anime itself, the lines look a lot like this because they're very uniform. And that's also why I was really drawn to this aesthetic. Here I'm going again in the real time, so this is what it looks. You see a click, and then I drag and get the thing, and then you hold Alt or Option to get rid of the second anchor point to restart the curve or something like that. I'll link a tutorial on how to use the pen tool in the description, because I'm not the best at explaining it. But yeah, it's just it takes its sweet time, and now we're back again to having it sped up. But it does create good results, I think, and it's a really good alternative. Like I said, I didn't use my drawing tablet at all for this line art, and it still looks, comparable. Perhaps I actually think it looks better than the clean sketch version in a lot of ways, especially the shoelaces, because again, with the shoelaces in the old version, I just did like a scribble, but here I actually tried to make them look like laces. I actually even used this version of the line art as a sort of sketch for the cleanest version of line art, or not the cleanest, but the most detailed version of line art in the next stage. But yeah, I really wanted to talk about this pen tool version of line arting, and I'll sandwich over the screen some of my older illustrations that utilize this kind of line art. They're pretty old, sort of cringy at this point in time for me, but it played a huge role in my development. And even now in my classes, we use Adobe Illustrator for a lot of things. So if you get into the habit of using the pen tool for stuff that you like drawing, like Spiderman for example, then if you're thinking of going into a future of graphic design, logo design, industrial design, anything like that, then it will serve you well to have all this experience with the pen tool, because Illustrator's almost, it's like, I believe some people might argue, but I think that Adobe Illustrator is 90% pen tool, and Adobe Illustrator is like the industry standard for designing logos and designing things that would, be printed in like a billboard or something. But yeah, it took me 45 minutes to do the pen tool line art, and I think it looks pretty clean. Of course, it has like this sort of uniform look to it, so I might call it a little bit stiff, but I think for the fact that I didn't draw it with my drawing tablet, I just used my trackpad on my computer, I think that it's a really good option that you should be familiar about, know about, consider, and stuff like that. And now we're moving on to the detailed line art version. And here, I think the main difference between the clean sketch and this version of line art is that you can see that every single line I basically draw like 5 or 6 times. Like you can see like undo, redraw, undo, redraw, undo, redraw, redraw. And this is like, it becomes a time-consuming process because of that. And I also rely a lot on rotating my canvas just to get more comfortable with like the pivot of my wrist. Like I really depend a lot on the pivot of my wrist to get smooth lines. And I don't think I included a real-time segment for this, but this really took a long time. If you just with the lines flashing, it's an undo and redraw, undo and redraw, undo and redraw. But also another thing to be considered, I'm using a custom line art brush instead of using a Photoshop default. Like in the clean sketch version of line art, I just use the same brush that I was sketching with, and it's just the hard round with opacity set to pen pressure. This is not a default brush, this is a custom brush, and the reason I use this brush over the default ones is because it's actually a lot sharper. You can see that the edges are really pixelated almost when we're zoomed in, but they're pixelated just because there's no fuzziness to them at all. The default hard round brush, even though it's 100% hard, it does have a little bit of fuzziness to the edges that this brush doesn't have. And another thing about this brush is it's more reactive to changes in how much pressure you put on the tablet. So you can go from thinner to there's more line weight variation basically. And I'm actually using the pen tool again, even in my detailed line art, because it's such a useful tool to make the process of drawing the laces a bit easier for myself. And that's also another reason why I think it's good to have more tools in your arsenal, because if you didn't know about the pen tool, you might not know that this would be considered almost a shortcut to doing something like this. And I was just adding a little bit more detail and stuff, because I ended up just coloring the laces black, and that made them easier to see. But in the pure line art stage, they were kind of hard to distinguish. I couldn't tell what was line art, what was lace, and what was the shoe. But either way, yeah, this style of line art is one that I did almost exclusively for 3-4 years. Basically, as soon as I got the hang of using my drawing tablet where my lines weren't all that shaky, I did this style of line art for most of my paintings. And this was also something I depended on before I even got used to painting without line art. I actually did include a real-time segment. Here it is. So this is what it looks like real-time, and it's just rotating the canvas and drawing the same thing a bunch of times, draw, undo, erase a little bit, undo, erase, draw, undo, draw, undo, draw, undo. See, this is the process. Every single line gets drawn 3 or 4 times at least, and maybe not 3 or 4 for these small ones, because these small ones are kind of very flurry, but most of the bigger important lines get redrawn a bunch, and that's why this is a very time-consuming process, because you want the line to come out just right, but to come out just right in a single stroke. The biggest difference between this method and the clean sketch method is that I don't mind taking 3 strokes to do a line that in this version of line art needs to be done in a single stroke. And we're back to getting sped up. But every time it flashes, it's undo and try it again, undo and try it again, and it becomes sort of I find with this type of line art, it's far easier to get into the quote-unquote zone than it is with the other kinds of line art, because the other kinds of line art you get to more focus, but here you just get into a rhythm of draw, undo, analyze it. Your brain's working really fast and kind of judging every single line on whether it's the line that you like. And I decided that for this particular artwork, just showing a very detailed line art wouldn't be enough to showcase how far you can push this, because in this type of line art you can also pick and choose how to render things and stuff like that. So I decided to include some solid black blocks, and then later I go over to color some parts of the lines white to get more of an aesthetic where this line art could potentially be considered its own finished illustration. Obviously I go around to color it, but I wanted to push this as far as I could go, and you could even theoretically go a lot farther than I went here. In my Inktober pieces, I think it's a lot easier to see how far you can push something while still considered ink work. But yeah, it took around an hour to do this detailed version of line art, and this is how it ended up looking, and I think it looks pretty great. I think it has a very dynamic look to it. And now I'm gonna briefly, this is the clean sketch line art, this is the pen tool line art, and this is the detail line art, and you can go back and pause the video and stuff like that to slowly go over the differences, maybe pick your poison, which one you like better. And now we're just gonna go into the coloring. But I just really did want to make this video explaining about the differences in line art, because I cannot explain to you how much trouble I had with line art when I was starting. I feel now at this point where I've been drawing for 10 years, I finally don't have a hate relationship with line art, but it felt like I really hated line art for the longest time. It was my least favorite part, but now I've finally kind of made peace with it. It just seemed really tedious. Like, I spent all this time trying to make this sketch look perfect, and now I have to go over it again in this very time-consuming, tedious manner, and it bothers me if it's not just right. And it's, I don't know, it was an interesting kind of process to try to learn myself how to line art and stuff like that. But I think it's worth it. It's like a really good skill to have, and there's a lot of wiggle room that I didn't really notice that there could be at the beginning. Like, I thought every single line art has to be 100% crisp and consistent and even and solid, and it has to be black. You don't have to keep your line art black. It's actually better if you color your line art. I don't think I colored any line art in this one, but it could be great for you to color line art. And yeah, just in general, I think that line art is a pretty cool tool, and it's nice to know that there's different ways of doing it. And yeah, that's about everything I have to say. The video is wrapping up. This is my interpretation of Miles Morales' Spider-Man from Into the Spider-Verse, and I tried to get the aesthetic of the movie in my own style, so with the chromatic aberration in the background and the little dots around the silhouette and stuff like that. But mainly I just want to talk about line art and different ways of line arting and how I line art, and I really hope that it was useful. Let me know in the comments, like, subscribe, check out the resources I've put in the card and in the description, and I'll see you all next week.